The rot smell of the deadfall pit clung to her clothes, her hair, her skin. Sigrid pulled the thin wool of her shawl tighter, a useless gesture against the damp chill that lived in the shadowed ravine. Stones shifted under her worn boots as she made her way down the treacherous path. It was a punishment, this duty. Everyone in the village of Greywood knew it. They sent the branded to the pit. The girl with the seared flesh on the back of her hand, the mark of a blasphemer, was the one who had to tend to the dying. She was the one who hauled the bodies of sick sheep and stillborn calves to their final stinking rest. Today was different. There was no carcass waiting for her at the bottom. There was only silence, thick and heavy, and a cage. It was crude, made of black iron bars driven into the earth and lashed together with cured leather. Big enough for a bear. Inside, a shape lay unnaturally still. Not a bear. A wolf. It was massive, larger than any wolf she had ever seen or heard of in tales. Its fur was the color of storm clouds and matted with mud and something dark that could only be blood. But it was the thing on its head that made her breath catch, a jagged shard of ice in her throat. An iron muzzle, spiked and rusted, was strapped tight around its snout. It was a thing of profound cruelty, designed not just to restrain, but to inflict pain with every twitch, every desperate breath. Fear was a familiar companion, a cold stone in her belly. But this was different. This was a cold, sharp rage. She knew the feel of hot iron on skin. She knew what it was to be marked, to be caged by the judgment of others. The wolf's ribs were a horrific ladder beneath its pelt. It was starved. The stillness was not one of peace, but of exhaustion. It was giving up. She took a step closer, then another. The stones were slick with moss, and she nearly lost her footing. Her hand, the branded one, shot out to brace against the bars of the cage. A flicker of movement inside. A great golden eye opened, unfocused and clouded with pain. It fixed on her. There was no growl, no threat. Just a slow, weary blink. It was dying, and it knew it. Sigrid's gaze fell to the buckle on the muzzle. It was thick leather, stiff and old. Her fingers, numb with cold, fumbled in the small pouch at her belt for her skinning knife. The blade was small, but sharp enough. "I know," she whispered, her voice a raw, unused thing. "I know it hurts." The wolf's ear twitched at the sound. That golden eye watched her, a flicker of something ancient and aware in its depths. It wasn't just a beast. She felt it with a certainty that defied logic. She slid her knife through the gap in the bars. Her hand trembled, the scarred skin pulling tight. The buckle was just out of reach. She had to get closer. She had to press her whole arm, her shoulder, against the cold iron. The stench of infection and filth rose from the wolf's fur. Section. She didn't think. She just did. She wedged her arm deeper, her fingers straining for the strap. The knife sawed at the thick leather. One strand snapped, then another. The wolf let out a low noise, a pained whine muffled by the iron. It shifted, and a wave of dizziness seemed to roll off it, a tangible cold that had nothing to do with the ravine's air. Her hand slipped. The knife's edge skipped across the back of her other hand, opening a shallow, bleeding line across her knuckles. She hissed, but didn't pull back. The scent of her own blood, sharp and coppery, filled the small space. The leather gave way. The heavy muzzle dropped from the wolf's snout with a dull thud onto the muddy ground. The great beast shuddered, drawing a ragged, painful breath. Its long snout was raw and bleeding where the iron had rubbed it raw. It lifted its head, just barely, and that impossible golden eye fixed on her bleeding hand. Slowly, with an effort that seemed to cost it everything, it stretched its neck forward. A long gray tongue emerged, swiping across the cut on her hand. It was rough, like sandpaper, but the gesture was shockingly gentle. It licked the blood clean, a quiet, desperate act of something that was not gratitude, but a kind of recognition. Then its head fell back to the dirt, and its eye closed. For a moment she thought it was dead. Panic seized her. She pressed her face to the bars. No, hey, wake up. A faint puff of steam rose from its nostrils. Still breathing. Just spent. She couldn't leave it. She couldn't. It was a death sentence. For the rest of the day, she worked. She used the pry bar she kept for shifting rocks to lever one of the iron stakes from the damp earth. It was brutal work, her muscles screaming, the brand on her hand aching with a phantom burn. By the time dusk painted the ravine in shades of purple and gray, she had a gap wide enough for it to crawl through. But it didn't move. You have to get up, she urged, her voice low. They'll be back. Whoever did this? No response. She ran back to her small, cold hut at the edge of the village, the place they let her live because it bordered the woods and no one else wanted it. She grabbed the heel of a stale loaf of bread in her water skin. It wasn't much. It was everything she had. When she returned, she pushed the bread through the bars. The wolf's nose twitched. It was alive. That was enough. She dribbled water onto its raw snout, watching as its tongue weakly licked the moisture. This became their secret. Every day she would go to the pit. She would bring scraps of food begged or stolen, and fresh water. She would talk to it, her voice the only sound in the oppressive silence. She told it about the village, about the brand her mother had given her for speaking a truth the elders didn't want to hear, about the loneliness that was a constant cold weight in her chest. The wolf just listened. It never made a sound, but its eyes, growing clearer and brighter each day, followed her every move. The cold that had emanated from it seemed to lessen, replaced by a quiet, waiting warmth. A week passed. It was stronger. It could stand, though it swayed on its feet. The wounds on its snout were beginning to heal. One evening, as the moon rose over the lip of the ravine, she arrived to find the cage empty. Her heart plummeted. It was gone. It had left her. Of course it had. It was a wild thing. She was just the girl who fed it. The loneliness returned, heavier than before. She turned to leave, tears blurring the path, when a voice spoke from the shadows behind her. You are not what they say you are. The voice was deep, laced with a strange resonance, like the ringing of a distant bell. She spun around, her hand flying to her knife. A man stood there leaning against the rock wall. He was tall, impossibly so, with shoulders broad enough to block out the moonlight. His hair was the color of a storm, and his eyes were a brilliant, impossible gold. He was dressed in rags, no better than her own, but he wore them with an innate authority that made her feel small. There were raw, healing cuts on his face, tracing the lines where the muzzle had been. It was him. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. The wolf. The man. They were one. Who? What are you? She stammered. He pushed himself off the wall, and the movement was full of a predator's grace, even through the lingering weakness. My name is Carden. He took a step toward her. She took a step back, her hand tightening on her knife. I will not harm you, he said, his voice softer now. He stopped, holding up his hands as if to show he was unarmed. You saved me, Sigrid. He knew her name. She had told the wolf her name. How? Was all she could manage. You spoke. I listened. He gestured to the empty cage. My enemies left me there to die. They crippled my shift, bound me in iron. They thought no one would dare approach. They were wrong. His golden eyes found her branded hand. You were not afraid. I was terrified, she admitted, the words barely a whisper. A faint smile touched his lips, a startlingly beautiful thing in his harsh face. Bravery is not the absence of fear. It is acting in spite of it. He took another slow step. I owe you my life. She shook her head. I didn't. I just couldn't leave you there. Why? He asked, his gaze intense, searching. Why help something so broken? The question hit her like a physical blow. Because she knew what it was to be broken. Because she knew what it was to be judged and discarded. She couldn't say that. The shame was too deep. Everyone deserves a chance, she said instead, the words feeling thin and hollow. He seemed to hear the words she didn't say. He closed the distance between them, his large frame blocking out the world. He was so close now she could feel a strange heat radiating from him, a stark contrast to the memory of that deathly cold. He reached out, not for her, but for the branded mark on her hand. He didn't touch it. His fingers hovered just over the scarred skin, so close she could feel their warmth. Who did this to you? He asked, his voice dropping to a low growl. The air crackled with a sudden, dangerous energy. It doesn't matter, she lied, pulling her hand back. It matters to me, Carden stated. It wasn't a question, it was a fact, a declaration. That was the beginning of their new secret. He didn't leave. He stayed in the woods near the ravine, still too weak to travel far. Every night she would bring him food. They would sit by a small, smokeless fire he somehow made with a snap of his fingers, and they would talk. He told her of a kingdom in the north, of ice-bound mountains and vast forests. He spoke of a curse, a cold that lived in his bloodline, passed down from his father. It fed on his power, growing stronger the more he used it, threatening to consume him, to freeze him from the inside out. His enemies had used a poison that aggravated the curse, trapping him in his weakened wolf form. They wanted my throne, he said, his voice flat. They nearly had it. You're a king? The idea was absurd. He was a man in rags, eating stolen bread by a tiny fire. I am, he confirmed, his golden eyes holding no trace of doubt. The Alpha King of the North. And I will have my kingdom back. She, in turn, found herself telling him things she had never told another soul. She spoke of her mother, Elspeth, the village matriarch, a woman whose piety was a weapon. Sigrid had seen her mother take offerings meant for the poor. She had spoken up. For that truth, her mother had held her hand to the sacred brazier and branded her a blasphemer, casting her own daughter out to the fringes of society. Carden listened to it all, his face a mask of stone, but his eyes burned with a cold fire that was more terrifying than any shouting rage. When she finished, her voice choked with old shame, he reached across the small fire and took her hand. Not the branded one, the other one. His thumb stroked across her knuckles, where the scar from the knife was a thin, white line. She did not mark you, he said, his voice a low rumble. She marked herself. As a monster. No one had ever taken her side. No one had ever validated her truth. The simple words undid something deep inside her. A tear slid down her cheek, hot and startling. She quickly wiped it away. I am weak, she whispered, ashamed of the emotion. No, he countered, his grip tightening just enough to feel solid, anchoring. You are strong enough to be kind in a world that has been cruel to you. That is a strength few kings possess. Their nights became the only real part of her day. The drudgery of her life in Greywood faded into a gray backdrop for the vibrant, secret world she shared with Carden. The heat from his body seemed to chase away the perpetual chill she lived with. The focused attention in his golden eyes made her feel seen for the first time in her life. He was getting stronger. The gaunt look was leaving his face, replaced by the sharp, predatory beauty she had first glimpsed. The grace returned to his movements. The power that radiated from him was a palpable thing, a low hum in the air around him. One night, he caught her hand as she offered him a piece of roasted rabbit. He didn't take the food. He just held her hand, turning it over, studying the lines of her palm in the firelight. "Your hands are cold," he murmured. "They're always cold." He brought her hand to his mouth and breathed on her fingertips. A wave of warmth, deep and penetrating, flowed up her arm, chasing away the numbness. It was more than just warm breath. It was life. It was his energy, consciously given to her. "Better?" he asked, his eyes locked on hers. She could only nod, her throat tight. He didn't let go. He held her hand, his thumb stroking gentle circles on her wrist. The simple touch was more intimate than anything she had ever known. It was terrifying. It was wonderful. "Sigrid," he began, his voice serious, "I am almost well. Soon I must leave. I must go north." The words were a stone dropping into a still pool. She had known this was coming. It still hurt. "Of course," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. She pulled her hand away, the loss of his warmth, an immediate ache. "You have a kingdom to reclaim." "I do," he said. "And I want you to come with me." She stared at him, stunned. "What?" "Come with me," he repeated. "Be at my side. In the north, you would not be the branded. You would be the woman who saved the king. You would be honored. You would be mine. Mine." The word hung in the air, possessive, absolute, and yet it sounded less like ownership and more like a plea. Hope, a dangerous, fragile thing, fluttered in her chest. To leave Greywood? To leave the pit and the whispers and the shame? To be with him? "I can't," she whispered, the hope dying as reality crashed down. "Look at me, Carden. I'm a branded outcast. A nobody. I would bring you nothing but shame. Your court would laugh at you." "Let them laugh," he growled, the sound vibrating in the air. "Anyone who questions my choice can take their concerns to my dungeons. I am the king. I choose you." He was magnificent in his certainty, a force of nature that believed it could bend the world to its will. And she, for one wild, impossible moment, believed it too. "Yes," she breathed. "Okay. Yes." The smile that broke across his face was like the sun rising after a month of rain. It transformed him. He stood up and pulled her to her feet, his hands on her waist. He was so much taller, so much stronger. He surrounded her. "We leave tomorrow night," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Be ready." She felt dizzy with it. Joy. It was a foreign feeling, but she welcomed it. For the first time, she had a future. But secrets in a village like Greywood have a way of unraveling. The next day, as she gathered her meager belongings, an extra shawl, the knife, a small wooden bird her father had carved for her before he died, a shadow fell across her doorway. It was her mother, Elspeth. She stood there, her hands clasped, her face a mask of serene piety. But her eyes, cold and hard as river stones, held no such peace. "Daughter," she said, the word a mockery. "You have been keeping to yourself. The elders are concerned." "I've been busy," Sigrid said, her body tense. Elspeth's eyes roamed the small, clean hut, then landed on the small bundle on the cot. "Going somewhere?" "No." The lie was instinctive. Her mother stepped inside, bringing a chill with her that had nothing to do with the air. "You are a poor liar, Sigrid. Always were." She ran a finger along a shelf, her gaze sharp. "And you have been stealing food. More than you could eat. Who are you feeding in the woods?" Sigrid's blood ran cold. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" Elspeth's voice was dangerously soft. "We found the cage. Empty. We found the tracks. A man's tracks leading away from it. You freed the beast. You harbored it." Her eyes narrowed. "You lay with it." "No." The accusation was vile. He was hurt. I helped him. "He?" Her mother's lips curled into a cruel smile. "So it is a man. a shifter, a monster. And you, my fallen daughter, have given yourself to it. You have brought a great danger to this village." "He's not a danger," Sigrid cried, desperate. "He's leaving, tonight. We're leaving." The admission hung in the air. Elspeth's face went blank for a moment, and then a look of pure, venomous triumph filled her eyes. "I see," she said. "You would abandon your home, your people, for this thing. You would run away from your penance." "It wasn't penance, it was your cruelty," Sigrid shot back, years of suppressed rage bubbling to the surface. "It was justice," Elspeth said, her voice like cracking ice. "And justice will be done again." She turned and left. Sigrid stood there trembling. She had to warn him. She grabbed her bundle and ran, not bothering with the path, crashing through the undergrowth toward the ravine. She was too late. When she reached their meeting spot, it was swarming with the men of the village, holding torches and pitchforks. They looked afraid, their fear making them ugly. And in the center of them stood Carden. He wasn't fighting. He was just standing there, his hands clenched into fists, his golden eyes fixed on the path where he expected her to appear. He was letting them surround him. For her. To keep her safe. Her mother stood before him, holding a lit torch high. "Monster," Elspeth declared, her voice ringing with false righteousness, "you have corrupted the soul of my daughter. You have brought your filth to our woods. You will be purged." Carden didn't even look at her. His eyes found Sigrid's through the crowd. A look of profound regret crossed his face. "Run," he mouthed. She couldn't. She was frozen. "And as for the girl," Elspeth continued, turning to the crowd, "she is lost to us, tainted. She must be cast out. Let her follow her beast into the dark. She is no longer of Greywood." It was a proclamation, a final severing. A man jabbed a pitchfork toward Carden. With a snarl, Carden moved. He was a blur of motion, a storm of violence. He didn't kill them, but he disarmed them, broke them, tossed them aside like dolls. It was over in seconds. The men lay groaning on the ground. He stood panting in the center of the carnage, the power rolling off him in visible waves. He looked at Elspeth, and for a moment, Sigrid thought he would kill her mother. The look in his eyes was pure murder. But then he looked at Sigrid, and the look softened into something agonizing. He couldn't kill her mother in front of her. He couldn't make her watch that. "Go!" Elspeth spat at Sigrid, her voice shaking but full of hate. "Go to your monster. You are dead to me. You are dead to this village." Carden took a step toward Sigrid, his hand outstretched. But the men were getting up. More were coming from the village, drawn by the noise. They couldn't fight a whole village, not without slaughtering them. "Go, Carden," Sigrid whispered, her heart breaking. "Go north. Get your kingdom. They'll kill you if you stay." "I will not leave you," he growled, his jaw tight. "You must," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "If you care for me at all, you will go. I'll be all right. I'll find you." It was a lie, but it was the only thing she could give him. He stared at her for a long, terrible moment. He was a king. He had to survive. He had to reclaim his throne. He was still not at his full strength. He knew it. She knew it. With a look of raw anguish, he nodded once. He turned and vanished into the trees, a phantom of the night. The villagers surged forward, but they didn't touch her. They parted, creating a path for her, their faces filled with scorn and fear. She was an exile. She turned her back on her mother, on the only home she had ever known, and walked into the darkness of the woods, utterly alone. The separation was a physical wound, a tearing in her soul. Her mother had won. The years that followed were hard. They were cold and hungry and lonely. Sigrid learned to survive. She learned to set snares, to find shelter, to read the weather in the clouds. The soft girl from Greywood died, and a harder woman was born in her place. She moved north, always north, driven by a desperate, fading hope. She heard stories as she traveled, whispers in taverns and trading posts. A new king was rising in the north. A cold king, they called him. King Carden. He had taken back his throne with brutal efficiency. He was uniting the fractured wolf packs under his iron-fisted rule. They said he was merciless, that his heart was a shard of ice. They said his wolf was a silent, starved thing inside him. They said he was looking for someone. The stories were a comfort and a terror. He was alive. He was king. But he sounded like a stranger, a man remade by his power and his loss. Would he even recognize her? Would the powerful king want the scarred survivor she had become? 5 years. 5 years of wandering. She had made a life for herself, of a sort. She lived in a small cabin she had repaired herself, deep in the foothills of the Dragon's Tooth Mountains, on the very edge of the lands the cold king now ruled. She kept to herself, a ghost in the woods. One winter afternoon, a patrol of soldiers found her. They wore the black and silver of the Alpha King. Their leader, a grim-faced man with a jagged scar on his cheek, looked at her with suspicion. "This is the king's territory," he said gruffly. "No one lives this far out without permission. Who are you?" "My name is Sigrid," she said, her voice even. She didn't flinch under his gaze. The name meant nothing to him. "You'll come with us. The king will decide what to do with a trespasser." They marched her for a day and a night to a fortress carved into the side of a mountain. It was a place of black stone and vast halls, filled with the hum of power and the scent of pine and cold air. It was a world away from her hovel. It was his world. They left her in a small, cold antechamber. She waited for hours. The old fear, the old feeling of worthlessness, trying to claw its way back up her throat. She pushed it down. She was not that girl anymore. The great stone doors opened. Carden stood there. He was no longer the man in rags. He was every inch the king the stories described. He wore fine-wrought armor of black steel, a heavy cloak of white wolf fur on his shoulders. His face was harder, carved from granite, the lines of it deeper. But his eyes were the same impossible gold. And they were fixed on her with a desperate, hungry intensity that stole the air from her lungs. He walked toward her, his steps echoing in the vast chamber. The guards stiffened, surprised by his presence. He ignored them. He ignored everything but her. "Sigrid," he breathed. The name was a prayer, a wound. He stopped in front of her. He looked older, more burdened. A profound cold emanated from him, far worse than she remembered, a deep, unnatural chill that seemed to sap the warmth from the very stone. "I found you," he said, his voice raw. "You found me," she confirmed, her own voice trembling. He reached out, his hand shaking slightly, and touched her cheek. His skin was like ice. A shock of it went through her, painful and sharp. He flinched back, as if he had burned her. "The cold," she whispered, understanding. "It's worse." "The bond was severed," he said, his voice tight with pain. "Without you, it feeds on me. The more I built this kingdom, the more I searched, the more power I used, the colder it got." He looked at her, his kingly mask crumbling, revealing the broken man beneath. "I am freezing from the inside out." The reunion was not the joyful embrace she had imagined. It was two fractured halves coming together. Finding the break was deeper than they knew. He was a king, but he was dying. She was a survivor, but she was an outsider in his world of power and politics. He installed her in chambers near his own, beautiful rooms with thick furs and a roaring fire that did little to chase the chill she felt whenever he was near. The court was a nest of vipers. They saw her as she had feared, a low-born vagrant, a weakness in their untouchable king. The whispers followed her everywhere. Carden didn't care. He spent every moment he could with her. They talked for hours, bridging the 5-year gap. But there was a wall between them now, a wall of ice that was both literal and metaphorical. He rarely touched her, and when he did, the cold of his skin was a painful reminder of the curse that was killing him. "The healers say there is no cure," he told her one night as they stood on a balcony overlooking the snow-covered mountains. "It is the price of my bloodline. My father froze solid in his throne room, his father before him. The power demands a balance. To hold the strength of the alpha, the heart must remain cold. Feeling, connection, it accelerates the process. It makes the cold hungry." "Loving me is killing you," she stated, the words like glass in her throat. He turned to her, his expression fierce. "Loving you is the only thing that has kept me alive this long." The threat to them was not just the curse, it was political. A delegation arrived from the southern territories, the lands bordering Greywood. They came to offer fealty, to join his growing kingdom. And leading them was her mother. Elspeth had aged, but she had gained a new kind of power. She was a high priestess now, her influence spreading far beyond their small village. When she saw Sigrid standing beside Carden's throne, her face was a mask of cold fury, quickly hidden behind a pious smile. "Your Majesty," she said, bowing low, "we come to seek your protection." Her eyes flickered to Sigrid. "I see you have taken in a stray. How charitable. This one was cast out from our village for blasphemy and consorting with beasts. A tainted soul." A murmur went through the court. Carden's hand clenched on the arm of his throne. The temperature in the hall dropped 10 degrees. "I was addressing my future queen." Carden's voice was deadly quiet, but it cut through the room like a shard of ice. "You will show her the respect she is due, or I will show you the inside of my dungeons." Elspeth's smile didn't falter, but her eyes glittered with malice. "Of course, Your Majesty. My apologies. I was merely concerned for your welfare. Such a connection could be seen as a weakness by your enemies." It was a threat, veiled in diplomacy. She was planting seeds of dissent. She was positioning herself. A few weeks later, the true crisis began. A sickness swept through the lower town of the fortress, a fever that affected only the children. It was swift and brutal. The healers were helpless. Among the sick was a small orphan boy named Finn, whom Sigrid had befriended. He was a quiet, solemn child who reminded her of herself. She spent hours by his bedside, wiping his brow, whispering stories to him, trying to soothe his pained cries. Carden, despite his duties, joined her whenever he could. He would stand in the doorway, unable to get too close for fear his unnatural cold would harm the boy further. He watched her tend to the child with a look of profound love and helplessness on his face. One night, as Finn's breathing grew shallow, a messenger arrived for Sigrid. Her mother requested a meeting, alone. Sigrid found Elspeth in the fortress's old temple. "The sickness is my work," Elspeth said without preamble. "A simple poison in the wells. I can provide the antidote." Sigrid stared at her, horrified. "You poisoned children?" "I am cleansing the flock," Elspeth said, her eyes alight with fanaticism. "But for you, my lost lamb, I will make an exception. You will have the antidote. Enough for the boy, and all the others." "What do you want?" Sigrid asked, her voice shaking with rage. "You will leave," her mother said simply. "You will walk out of this fortress tonight, and you will never return. You will renounce the king. In return, the children will live. If you refuse, or if you tell him, they all die. And I will tell the court that the king's consort brought this plague with her from the wilds. It was a perfect trap. Her freedom for their lives, her heart for theirs." She looked at her mother, at the woman who had branded her, exiled her, and now held the lives of innocent children in her hand. There was no choice. There never was. "I'll do it," she said, her voice hollow. She returned to the sick room. Carden was there, standing over Finn's cot. He looked up as she entered, and he knew. Something in her face told him everything. "What did she do?" he asked, his voice a low growl. Sigrid couldn't speak. She just shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. Suddenly Carden swayed. He braced himself against the wall, a gasp of pain escaping his lips. A latticework of frost spread from his fingertips across the stone. The cold pouring off him was terrifying, a palpable aura of death. "Carden!" she cried, rushing to him. "It's the bond," he gasped, his teeth chattering, his skin turning a waxy pale blue. "Your pain, your choice. It's feeding the cold, it's breaking me." He slid down the wall, his legs no longer able to support him. The frost was crawling up his arms, encasing him. "Don't," she begged, falling to her knees beside him. "Don't leave me." He reached up, his movements slow and agonizing, and cupped her face with a hand that was now almost solid ice. It burned her skin, but she didn't pull away. "I'm sorry, Sigrid," he whispered, his breath misting in the air. "I couldn't protect you from this." His golden eyes, the last warmth in his body, found hers. "I love you." The words hit her harder than any physical blow. He was dying. He was dying because of her, because he loved her, and he was using his last breath to tell her so. "I love you too," she sobbed, pressing her face to his freezing chest. "Carden, please." His eyes fluttered closed. The light in them went out. The frost covered his face, his hair, his armor, until he was a statue of ice, a king frozen on his own throne of sorrow. He was gone. A terrible silent scream built in her chest. Her mother had taken everything, her home, her name, and now, her love. The rage she had carried for a lifetime, the burning shame of the brand, the cold loneliness of exile, the terror of his curse, it all coalesced into a single sharp point of agony. She wanted to burn the world down. She wanted to destroy her mother. She wanted to shatter the stone walls and let the mountains fall. But then she looked at Carden's frozen face, so still and peaceful, and she looked at the sick child in the cot, his life hanging by a thread. Rage would not save them. Rage had been her prison for years, the very thing her mother had used to control her. It was the fuel for her shame, the reason she had always believed she was tainted. Something shifted inside her, a quiet surrender. She let the rage go. She didn't fight it. She just opened her hands and let it drift away like smoke. And in its place, something else rose. Not love, not hope, forgiveness. She forgave her mother. Not because Elspeth deserved it, but because Sigrid deserved to be free of the hatred that had defined her. She forgave the villagers for their fear. She forgave the world for its cruelty. And finally, she forgave herself for believing she was worthless. The release was a physical sensation, a dam breaking inside her soul. And through the breach, a power she never knew she possessed came flooding out. It started as a low hum in her chest, a vibration that resonated with the stone beneath her. She stood up and walked to the center of the hall where the court had gathered, drawn by the commotion. Her mother stood there, a triumphant sneer on her lips. "It is over," Elspeth said. "The monster is dead. Now leave." Sigrid looked at her mother, and for the first time, she felt not rage or fear, but pity. She opened her mouth, and she spoke. "No." The word was not loud, it was barely more than a whisper. But it hit the hall like a thunderclap. The very air vibrated with it. The torches flickered, and the stones themselves seemed to sing with the resonance of her voice. Elspeth stumbled back, her hand flying to her ears. "What is this sorcery?" "It is the truth," Sigrid said, and her voice grew stronger, each word imbued with a power that was as undeniable as gravity. You are a woman who hides her greed behind piety. You are a mother who burns her own child for speaking a truth you could not bear. You poison the wells. You poison these children. You are the monster here. Every word landed like a physical blow. The glamour of holiness that surrounded Elspeth shattered. The court stared at her, truly seeing the venomous, hateful woman beneath the priestess's robes for the first time. The lies she had built her power on crumbled to dust, exposed by the simple, resonant truth of Sigrid's voice. Elspeth shrieked, a sound of pure animal fury, and lunged at her. Sigrid didn't move. She just spoke one more word. Enough. The word struck her mother like an invisible wall. Elspeth was thrown backward, landing in a heap at the foot of the throne, stripped of her power, her influence, her lies. She was just a small, pathetic woman, weeping in the dirt. Sigrid turned away from her, her focus entirely on Carden. She walked back to his frozen form and placed her hands on his chest. The ice burned her skin, but she ignored it. She leaned down and whispered into his ear, her voice now soft, imbued with all the love and forgiveness and strength she had just found. Come back to me, Carden. The cold has no power over us. Not anymore. She sang then, a wordless melody that came from the deepest part of her soul. It was a song of warmth, of life, of a bond reforged in truth. The sound filled the room, a golden light pouring from her, pushing back the shadows. A crack appeared in the ice on Carden's chest. Then another. The frost began to recede, melting not into water, but into harmless steam that vanished into the air. Color returned to his skin. The bluish tint faded, replaced by a healthy, living flush. With a shuddering gasp, his golden eyes flew open. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and the cold was gone. Not just from his skin, but from his eyes, from his soul. In its place was a deep, abiding warmth that mirrored the one in her own heart. He sat up, his movements fluid and strong, and pulled her into his arms. He held her tight, burying his face in her hair. He was warm. He was real. He was alive. Sigrid, he murmured against her skin. Your voice. It was like the sun. It was just the truth, she whispered back, holding on to him as if she would never let go. In the sick room, Finn and the other children stirred. Their fevers broke. The antidote, which Elspeth had hidden in her robes, was found and administered. But the healers said later it was Sigrid's song that had truly turned the tide. A wave of life that had washed through the entire fortress. Months later, the kingdom was at peace. Elspeth was imprisoned in the very cells Carden had once threatened, her power broken forever. The court, having witnessed Sigrid's power and Carden's unwavering devotion, now looked at her with awe and respect. She was not the king's weakness. She was his strength, the missing half of his soul. One morning, Sigrid woke to the feeling of sunlight on her face. Carden was sitting on the edge of their bed, watching her. The haunted, pained look was gone from his eyes, replaced by a deep and lasting peace. Good morning, my queen, he said, his voice soft. She smiled, stretching. Good morning, my king. He took her hand, the one with the brand. He traced the old, faded scar with his thumb. It no longer ached with phantom pain. It was just a part of her story now. A reminder of the girl who had been brave enough to walk into a pit and free a monster, only to find a king. Does it hurt? He asked, his voice gentle. She looked at their joined hands, his warm and strong, hers scarred but steady. She thought of the cold, the fear, the loneliness. It all felt like a lifetime ago. Not anymore, she said, and it was the honest truth. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed the mark, not to heal it, but to honor her. Outside, the snows of the north were beginning to melt. Spring was coming.